Hey, it's Jeff Sauer here, and I have a confession for you. I really don't like reporting. I don't like redundancy. I don't like doing the same thing over and over again, wasting my time to do something mundane. And this is especially true when it comes to reporting for PPC programs. It is a lot of work to pull together data from different systems. We have our Google Ads data, we have our Facebook Ads data, we have Bing Ads data, and that doesn't even mention some of the other networks we might be advertising on. So if you don't like reporting as much as me, you're going to love this training video where we talk about how to automate your PPC reporting. Welcome all my friends. Awesome to have you on board, and hopefully you don't find this to be too boring. I'll do my best to make it good. This is the unedited version, so you're going to get some of my flaws as we go through this, but this is a skill share on how to consolidate your PPC reports with Google Data Studio and Supermetrics. So I'm going to start this video with a perspective as to how I've evolved my PPC reporting over the years. Now, the first way that I delivered reports was not very pretty. It was simply copying and pasting screenshots out of the interface of Google AdWords at the time and sending it over to clients. And it looked something like this. Actually, it looked exactly like this because this is a report that I dug up from 2006 when I landed my first PPC client. So as you can see here, I basically just did a dump of metrics, and this is what it looked like. And I would go and report to my clients and say stuff like, your campaign had like 156 clicks and 12,291 impressions, and the conversion rate was 0.64%. And then I would just send that as a report. And I didn't qualify it. I didn't explain it. I didn't tell them if it was good or bad. That was my report. That is me, circa 2006, when I delivered a PPC report to somebody. Not great, huh? Well, I evolved. Didn't take very long for me to evolve my reporting to manual Excel reporting. And I would develop something like this. And trust me, I was so proud of this. And this is actually something I did for probably 5 years or so at various stages, where we would put all the data from the Google Ads platform, the Google AdWords platform, and we would put it into an Excel spreadsheet in a tab that was hidden. And then we would have the tab with the reports, and it would just be the standard Excel colors, the standard Excel palette, and we would throw some kind of title on it, and that was the report we put out there. And obviously this is a little bit better than screenshots. At least it feels proprietary to a certain extent. But as you can probably imagine, when I presented this report, it would be something like, the blue line is bigger, so that means that it's more important, and you need to have more blue. And really, is that important? Is that really what we were driving people towards? And is that really actionable? Probably not. But at the time, I was pretty excited about it because I was really focused on just making life easier and getting as much data as possible. And I thought that was good. I thought that was amazing. Well, my evolution, it didn't stop there, obviously, and thankfully for all of us here. If I would have stopped, if I didn't evolve, then we probably wouldn't be talking about this lesson in this video here. So the next step was to try some automated data collection. And this is again using Excel and basically pulling upon the Google Analytics API, emailing reports to myself, whatever it took. I actually tried many iterations, many ways of doing this, and basically making it so that these reports that still not the greatest reports in the world, still not the prettiest thing, and maybe not that actionable, at least it was coming from a database. At least it was coming from a way where I wasn't going and exporting, copying, pasting values from a advertising system and placing them into a spreadsheet. So at least the collection was automated. Reports, arguably not much better than what was there before, but at least it had some kind of semblance of proprietary, and it took a lot less time. Now, it took a lot less time for me because we had to hire somebody to manage this system. So it wasn't me who was writing those queries. It wasn't me who was working on this stuff. I influenced it. I was one of the constituents who told people what to do, how to design the data structure. But we actually had to have somebody whose full-time job pretty much, or at least half of their time, was developing this database, these reports. And as I had mentioned, we tried several different things. We tried a Microsoft Access database. We tried doing it directly in Excel before we hit row limits. We tried SQL Server. We've done all these things and many more things in order to get reporting going. And often reporting day would be something like this. Hey, I spent all night working on this thing and it sort of broke. So I really just did it manually. But we have this cool proprietary system that anybody can use, and it's awesome. And so I was really excited that we had built a system, but honestly, it didn't really save that much time in the long run. It just shifted where the time went. And I just alluded to it here, but the next step was to have a data warehouse. I'm not going to show you a visual of that because a data warehouse is not something that's easy to show you a picture of. But basically, it was like, youch, we're going to have a developer take how long to get this thing done? So it went from, yes, less time spent on my end, less time other people spent on it, more time spent by others. And finally, automatic monthly reports. Now, this is something that you'd think would be the holy grail when it comes to reporting. Everything happens automatically. You wake up and the reports are done for you. But of course, when you're waking up and the reports are done for you, that's probably a dream because you're dreaming because this never really happens. This is actually something that never really takes place. So automated reporting is a dream. And the reason why is because automations break. You think you can set it and forget it, and it really doesn't work that way. It does take care and feeding to make any system work. And therein lies the problem. You're basically a marketer who has to write code if you want to get your consolidated platform to work, or you need to make enough money selling PPC, providing it to your clients, that you can hire a developer in-house or a contractor to get the system built that you need. That was, of course, before Google Data Studio came around. Now, I love Google Data Studio because it allows marketers to gather data automatically without always having to rely on a developer. In fact, I've created some really cool dashboards in Data Studio, and I have not had to contact a developer or write any code myself. Of course, I do write things like functions where I'm adding data together and making things look good, but it's similar to what you'd be doing in Excel if you wanted to have something show up in a function in Excel. And the purpose of this video is to show you how I streamline reporting using Google Data Studio across multiple platforms. So let's get into it. And I really look at generating reports as a 3-step process. The first step is actually to go analog and to be honest with yourself as to what you're looking for in a report. So before I develop most reports, I do something like this. I have my trusty whiteboard and I start to map out what I'm looking to do in this report. The whiteboard itself is actually the same format as a sheet of paper, so I can say what information can I fit onto a whiteboard would be very similar to what I could fit on a sheet of paper or into a dashboard in Data Studio. What am I looking for? What would be the ideal scenario? What do I want to convey in the report that I'm generating? Now, of course, this is one of those things where you might think that it's overkill to do this manually on a whiteboard or even on a sheet of paper. But I will tell you that for every time that you erase something on a whiteboard, you are saving yourself 10 to 20 hours in extra work trying to change that when you're inside something like Data Studio. And in fact, even if you're not going to use a whiteboard, I would still recommend using something other than Data Studio to get your format right. Maybe using something like an Excel template where you have pinpoint control over where you put things and just making sure that you have an idea as to where you want to assemble everything in your report. Okay, now that we've gone analog, let's talk about introducing technology to this process. Now, there's a key piece of technology for making all this happen when it comes to consolidated PPC reporting, and that technology is called Supermetrics. As you can probably imagine, I'm a pretty big fan of Supermetrics. I'm an advocate of it, and I really think it's a revolutionary product as far as pulling data from multiple systems. And we'll show you a live demo of Supermetrics in just a minute here, but I just want to say first and foremost that it really is a lifesaver when it comes to reporting. If it weren't for Supermetrics, it would be very difficult to do what I'm going to show you in this demo. And once you have your Supermetrics in place, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to make sure that the data you want is available either through the Supermetrics API or directly through the Google Ads API, which feeds into Data Studio. And so here's a screenshot of me inside Data Studio, just doing a self-check to say, can I get the data that I need in order to develop this report that I'm looking to develop? And the report that I'm looking to develop is exactly what was on that whiteboard. The next step is use naming conventions to make sure that you can see everything in their own place. Now, what I'm doing here might not look like much because it's just a screenshot, but I'm consolidating data from 3 different companies. I'm consolidating data from 3 of the biggest internet giants in the world, from Microsoft Bing, from Google Ads, and from Facebook advertising. And I'm taking their unique way of looking at advertising and reporting on advertising, and I'm consolidating it all into one spot right inside Data Studio. Now, that is a feat of engineering that's beyond my skills, maybe beyond your skills as well, but the reality is Google Data Studio and Supermetrics makes this really easy. It makes it so easy that you sometimes forget what data you're looking at, and so naming conventions are really important here. And as you can see, if I'm pulling in cost data, I can't just call it cost. I have to indicate what system I'm on. So in this case, I'm pulling in the cost data from Google, pulling in clicks from Google, impressions from Google, and then if you go down the list, I'm doing the same thing for Facebook and for Bing. The next revolutionary thing we can do as a result of Supermetrics and the connection to Google Data Studio is we can create calculated fields where we're not just pulling in the impressions from Google or the impressions from Facebook. We're actually taking the combined value of all these impressions and building a single calculated metric that we can then put onto our dashboard. And so this is a calculated metric that shows you exactly how many impressions we got across all the platforms where we're advertising. And the next step I do whenever I'm consolidating all my data and developing this report is I put everything into an individual table, as you can see here, where I consolidate all the numbers and just show exactly what happened. So I can see how many impressions I had from Facebook, Google, Bing, and all impressions by day, just to make sure that this data is high quality, just to make sure that I agree with the data that I've collected. And finally, you can see which of your metrics are actually available if you were to build them into a dashboard. And so these are scorecard metrics where I'm just pulling in the sum of all my impressions, all my clicks, costs, and conversions. And it happens automatically when I do this configuration, when I have these calculated fields. And so this is the process I go through whenever I create a dashboard. And the value in creating this process is simply that I don't need to worry about formatting. I'm just making sure that I can get at the information that's important to me. Because there's a lot of data that's available to you, but not all of it's important, and you want to make sure you can get at what's important, what was on your crude whiteboard drawing, as closely as possible so that you can see that your vision matches the reality of what's available. And if it's not, then you can spend your time going and trying to find out where that data is. And as a last case scenario, if you can't find that data easily, or if you can't automate it because there's no connector to Supermetrics, it's not available somewhere, you can actually use Google Sheets as your catch-all to put the data in there and then manually update that sheet to have a dashboard with data that's not automatically available. Now, if you're not sure what I'm talking about here, if you're not sure how this thing works, definitely check out my Data Studio Mastery course, because we go in depth into how to consolidate all your data sources, how to make sense of all this, and how you can fill in gaps that you have using Google Sheets. And you can learn more about Data Studio Mastery at datadrivenyou.com. Okay, so enough talk about how this thing works. Let's go live into Google Data Studio and see what it looks like when I consolidate all this data. And so for this video, I decided to start in the middle. I've actually pulled some of this data together. I wanted to save us some time. Instead of building it from scratch, I'm just showing you what my canvas looks like as I start to pull data in from multiple platforms. And perhaps the most important thing to pay attention to here is that I have the consolidated data source here. And if I were to click on that, I can see that I have my data-driven blended PPC data sample. And if I were to edit that, I can see that this is where I pull in data from my multiple systems. And so I have here a data source of Google Ads data. I'm calling it my Google Ads sample data. I have my Facebook Ads sample, then I have my Bing Ads sample. And these data sources are all coming from different systems. Bing Ads is coming through Supermetrics, and Facebook Ads is also coming through Supermetrics, and Google Ads is coming from the native Google Ads connector. So let me show you where that data is coming from, just so we can get on the same page as to how do I get this stuff together, and then I'll go back and talk about how it's blended in just a moment here. So I'm going to close this out, and I'm going to go to my data sources, and I can see here that I have 3 different data sources. One is Facebook, Google, and Bing. And so if we look here, this one has the Google Ads logo, and if I edit this thing, I can see this is actually a connection through Google Ads provided by Google to my Google Ads account. And that's really all that I did there. It was I connected to Google Ads. If you're not sure how to connect to a native Google connector, make sure you check out my Data Studio tutorial on jeffalytics.com, because we do have some really good resources available to you on how to do the basics of Data Studio. And I would consider this to be a basic function of Data Studio. And if we go back and look at our data sources, we can see we have Facebook Ads and Bing, and these ones both work in a similar way. So what we're doing here is we're connecting to both Data Studio as well as a third-party connector called Supermetrics, and Supermetrics allows me to connect to my Bing Ads account. Now notice this is a Bing Ads connection by Supermetrics. So I've gone ahead and subscribed to a premium version of Supermetrics, and I've been able to connect to both my Bing Ads account and my Facebook Ads account. And if you want to understand how to make these connections, be sure to check out our tutorial, because we do talk about how to connect to third-party sources as well. But because we have a lot of work to do when it comes to consolidated PPC reporting, I'm going to go back and take a look at the data once we have all three of these connections made. So here we are back again where all these connections are made, and I'm going to go take a look at this data blending once again. So data blending is a pretty complex feature of Data Studio. It is pretty easy to get it wrong. I've actually gotten it wrong many times over the years, just trying to get it all sorted out and figuring it out. But basically the way that data blending works is that you need to have a primary key, which is a common feature across all your data that you can use to blend things together. And in this case, I'm using both the date and the year and month to consolidate things. Now this is where it gets tricky though, because if you notice in the Google Ads API, which shame on Google for having such a terrible naming convention, they actually call it day and month. But the reality is the day and month matches more closely to the year and month and the date that is going on. And so make sure that when you're paying attention to blending, that you have an idea as to what the naming convention is across the different systems. And now I had mentioned earlier that naming conventions are pretty important, and you can start to see why now, because different systems name them differently. And if you're not used to this, if you've never done it before, you can spend hours trying to find out what they actually meant. You can do a lot of connections, you can get a lot of errors, and you're going to see a lot of annoyances with the system. So that's happened to me. I've gone and done that work, and I don't want you to have to do it, and that's part of why I create these tutorials. And so if we look at our connection, this is what we're joining on, is these three fields. And then below, for each one of these different API connections, these two from Supermetrics and this one from Google, we have the choice as to which metrics we're going to pull in. And so if I click on Add Metric, I'm given an exhaustive list of metrics that I could take a look at from each respective API from the different systems. And again, this is where it gets crazy because we're talking about three of the biggest tech giants in the world, all having different ways of trying to make this stuff work and how to tell us we should be reporting on the results. And so if you look at this, this is insane. And you probably don't need all of this. Actually, you don't need all this. You probably don't need much of it. You probably need about 1% of the values that are available. And so this is where I always go back to the prototype, the low-fi prototype that I drew on the whiteboard, and I say, what am I actually trying to get at? In that case, I really only had a handful of metrics. One of them was impressions, so I just start typing in the word impressions. And you can see even here, there's a lot of different impressions that are available, and they're going to be different across each system. And so that's another nuance when it comes to consolidated reporting is impressions might mean something different, or they might have different metrics on impressions on each platform. If you wanted to consolidate and compare them side by side or blend them together, you're actually not going to have an apples to apples comparison. So you're going to want to look at the most raw metric possible when you're consolidating and blending data. And in this case, it is impressions. So I'm going to choose impressions, which is already in there actually. See how I named it? Then I'm going to give it a naming convention to make sure that everything is clear that I'm going from Bing. So you can type in the word impressions and then maybe put Bing in there. And that's my way of knowing things. Now, when you type in a long word like impressions and then Bing in parentheses, it does make your columns big. So that's why I consolidated it even further to IMPR and then Bing. Now, you can choose later on how you want to display this. You can actually have it in long form or short form. You have the option to change this again later on in each individual report block. So what you choose here is not the end of the world. I just try to make it as universal because then you can find, oh yeah, I'm looking at the Bing data here. So I'm going to get rid of this thing because I don't need it. And that's essentially how blended data works. Every metric that you choose across the platforms gets placed into your queue and your options of things you can put in place, and you're ready to go. So I'm going to close this out without saving. And now we're going to keep on moving along, and we're going to take a look at how I built this raw report that just shows a table of data. So I'm using my dimension of day. Now I could very easily just add the month in there, and it's going to do a different level of consolidation. Now, if I do month and I get rid of day, this is going to be a much smaller table because I only have a few months of data to report on. And actually, I think this looks a little bit better because now I can see things in a monthly basis. And if you want to make sure you sort this in the right way. So this is sorted by impressions, but if I wanted to sort by month, I could change this to be a monthly sort and sort it ascending to do the beginning of the year. But not important for testing the data. That's really more important later on if you want to have user friendliness or if you want to design your reports based on certain criteria. But here we are now, and as you can see, I have these different metrics that are available, and they show up as columns. And each one of these things comes from that blended data source that we have in place, except for this one, which is the impressions all. Now here's another cool thing about Google Data Studio, something that was released in late 2018, and that is the capability to calculate data, to blend data, and then to do a calculated field on top of it. And this is one of those meta things where you're taking data from different sources, blending them together, and then you're also creating a blended metric. And so this is not something that's been around forever, but it's something that's pretty cool when you use it. And the way that this works, you hit add metric, and then you click on create field. And when you create your field, you can do whatever you want. So I'm going to type in impressions, and then all in parentheses, because this is for all reports. Remember that naming convention, how important it is. And then I just type in the word impression. Oh, wow, we have our Google impressions. I want to do that plus our Facebook ones. And then we're going to do that plus our Bing ones. Put those together, and now we have a sum of all of our impressions, and we can see what that looks like. Now, of course, I've already created this thing. This is a little bit like a cooking show, so I'm not going to actually take that and add it to my report. It already exists right here. And you can see, if I do the math, just in my head, we have 14,932 plus 517 plus 40 equals 15,068. Now, I'm not sure about you, but when I combine these numbers in my head, it should be higher. And so I'm going to have to go back to the drawing board and investigate why that's happening. The reality is that it probably has to do with the way that I'm blending the data. The reality is that it probably has to do with the way that I'm blending the data. Maybe there's a difference in the way that they calculate day. Maybe it's for my date range. I'm not sure, but I will go back to the drawing board and figure that out before I deliver the final report. And that's why we have this sandbox. Now, I'm not going to go and dwell on this thing and derail this video too much, but this is where you do need to have some understanding of data and the ability to troubleshoot if your numbers aren't adding up. So I'm going to take a look at that and see what I can do to add up the numbers offline. But let's finish up and talk about the final step that I have in place, and that is to start to build the dashboard in a lo-fi way. So if you remember back to my prototype that I put on the whiteboard, the things that I wanted to track in the first upper columns are impressions, clicks, cost, and conversion. And this looks pretty solid. Again, maybe it's not perfect because the Google impressions don't appear to be coming over exactly how we want them. But once I can figure that out, once I solve that problem, then we are going to get the right data in here. We're going to get the right numbers. And so I think we're on the right track, and we're at the point now where I would start to build out the real dashboard. Now, if you want to be a purist, you might build out your entire dashboard without any formatting. But what I find is that if you build out too much of your dashboard in your sandbox, and you do too much of your work in this setting, you're going to find that when you go and try to do this again in another template, basically by either copying a template that works, or when you go in and you play with your theme, if you go in and you say, I want the dark theme, and you put that in place, you're going to be better off starting with a template from something you've already built. Now, I've built a ton of templates for data-driven, and so I almost always start with something that has our color palette, our logo, and the known way that we like to report before I do anything else. And so I'm going to show you how I do it starting with my own template when we get to our next section. But for now, this is just my sandbox. It's a report that I'm not going to ever show to anybody, where I just go and check, is the data there, and can I make sense of it? And if the data is not there, then I have to do some discovery, or I have to go and manually add that to a Google Sheet and then import that as a data source to get things to work. Okay, so you've seen how my sandbox works and the process that I go through just to see what data I have and does it make sense. And the final step is to present your data in a way that makes sense. So let's go ahead and do this live. Let's create our final PPC consolidated report. Okay, so here we are back in Data Studio, and I've actually taken my data-driven template, the 2018 year in review template, which I think is pretty solid. It's actually worked really well for many people. Thousands of people have downloaded this and run their own year in review report. I'm going to take this thing because I like the format, and it's pretty similar to what I had whiteboarded out there. And I'm going to use this as my starting point for developing this report. So I'm going to hit copy this report. And for the data sources, it's not going to really match up, but I don't want to have a bunch of errors. So I'm just going to choose the sample data. No problem. I'm going to stick with that sample data. And then things are going to get real pretty fast as I go in and I try to make this work with my own data. So a few things to notice is that we have the copy of the template. So I'm going to call it data-driven template. I'm going to call it Consolidated PPC. Consolidated PPC advertising. We have a date picker. If you want to, you can actually go ahead and you can choose what dates you want to look at. I'm going to choose this one, this year to date. And I'm going to apply it there. That's actually going to change the data that's coming in. And there's other housekeeping items that I'll end up doing, but I'm not going to do it as part of this video. What I want to get at is, how do we figure out the scorecard metrics for total impressions, for total clicks, for total cost, and for total conversions from PPC using our blended data. Now, if we go in here and we take a look, this is coming from a Google Analytics sample data. If I want to replace this data, I can add my data source of Facebook ads and add it to the report, but that's not going to give us the consolidated blended data that we're looking for. And unfortunately, I don't have the ability to add my blended data to a different report. And that's why I said I don't want to get too in love with my sandbox data, because it's going to be gone and I still need to go and do those steps over again. So you want to make sure that you can collect the data, you want to play around in your sandbox, but you also don't want to get too deep into it, because then you just have to go replace it again in the future. So if I go in here, I have my impressions. This is coming from Facebook. What I really want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to create a blended data source. So I'm going to create a data view using multiple data sources. The first data source is going to be my Facebook ads, for example. The second one is going to be my Google ads. And the third one is going to be my Bing ads. Now, if you've never added Facebook ads or Bing ads, or you've never worked with Supermetrics, which is the connector, make sure that you learn how to do that part first, or take my premium Google Data Studio course, because we do walk through that step by step how it works. And we also have a very nice discount on Supermetrics inside the course. But in the interest of time, I want to talk about how do we do the joining of data. How do we make it so we can match things together and then recreate our blended data source in this new area? So what we want to do is you want to add a dimension. And remember, we had date here. And now this API is crazy enough that we have multiple dates. I'm just going to choose the vanilla plain date. We also have one called month. We want date and year and month. Actually, that's what we needed in this case. And notice that it automatically filled it in for Bing, but it's missing for Google because Google has a really ridiculous naming convention. Theirs is actually day, and then their month is actually just month, I'm pretty sure. Now, I'm not confident in it because I can't actually see the data, but if I were to get rid of this thing and move it up and move it up, let's see here. Are we blending? Are we working? Okay, that looks like it's working. I'm going to get rid of that one. I'm going to get rid of that one. And I think we are matched up now. We're at parity with what we had in my sandbox account. And next, let's add some metrics. I'm just going to go with the old classics, impressions. I'm going to go to impressions here. And I'm going to go to impressions here. Now this is where the naming convention becomes really important, because if I add the impressions in for each of these, I won't know what network I'm talking about. And that's why I have to go in there and edit them and call them impressions. This is going to be Facebook. I'm going to go impressions for Google. And I'm going to go impressions for Bing. And I'm going to do this for the rest of my metrics that are part of my dashboard, but I'm not going to make you suffer through that. I'm going to come back to you once I have them all in place. Okay, so we've gone through and consolidated this. Just a word to the wise, if you go cost in Facebook, it's actually called amount spent. And I spent some time struggling trying to figure out what the heck that was. It is called amount spent in the Facebook API. So if we save this, hopefully nothing breaks and everything works. We are going to be on our road to having our consolidated reporting. So I'm saving everything. Now, I don't quite have what I need for total impressions across all platforms because I don't have that calculated field yet. Now, the first thing we want to do, instead of looking at our Facebook ad sample, I'm going to look at our blended data here. If I add that to the account, now we can see the metrics we just created. And what we really want, though, instead of impressions from an individual platform, is we want to consolidate them together. And so the way that we do that is we go to create a field, and we're going to add impressions all. Then we go with our impressions from Facebook plus impressions from Google plus impressions from Bing. And we're going to have to wait a little bit of time for the API to work. This is what happens when you're working with third-party data, especially for the first time. It does take some time to pull things together. And the reason why is because Google's doing a single trip between Google systems, whereas when you're connecting to a third party like Facebook and Bing through Supermetrics, there's actually multiple round trips that need to happen for it to work. But it is working, and now we can see, are we getting at our impressions number in this account? And this is showing us the impressions for the year. And the cool thing is that it does automatically show us how we did compared to last year. For this account, we're not advertising nearly as much on Facebook, and also we're comparing to a full year, so it's not going to be apples to apples. So it will be down when we're looking at a complete annual dashboard. And in order to get this to work for all the other metrics, we're going to have to do the same process. We go to our blended data. Inside our blended data, we need to calculate a new field, and it's going to be clicks, all clicks, and we're going to go through and we're going to do clicks plus clicks plus clicks. And we'll have to do the same thing for other ones, and I'm not going to bore you with the calculations. I'm just going to show you what it looks like when they're done. And so here we are with everything consolidated into one spot, at least our first row. This is real live data from our sample accounts, and you can see things are coming in. Obviously the numbers aren't matching up perfectly, but that's okay because we're using a demo account, and this account really isn't active anymore. And so if we recall back to the whiteboard session, we wanted to have another line, which is some calculated metrics. We want to have a chart in the lower left-hand side, and we want to have 4 different pie charts in the right-hand side to see how things come together. Now, pie charts might not be a good idea, but that was what I had in my mind when I whiteboarded this thing. So let's just see what it looks like when we pull it together. And one of the reasons why I like starting with an existing template within Data Studio is that I can just delete things that are there right now, move things around, and I don't have to do a lot of work to get this thing to look exactly how I want it to look. And so I'm just going to take the sessions and I'm going to bump them down just a little bit here. I'm going to try to bump this thing down to a similar one. Probably should have done it together in the first place, but it doesn't matter. I'm just trying to create some space for myself with this canvas. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move this one up a little bit, and let's just get this thing to be nicely aligned. And if alignment's a problem, you just go ahead and align this stuff just like you would in any other tool that's out there. So we want to make sure that we have this stuff aligned as closely as possible. And then just go ahead and create your general painting canvas where you're going to be playing with. And so obviously with 4 pie charts, I'm not going to have a lot of space, but I can try to make space as I go forward. Let's start with just filling in the next set of KPI metrics. And that is our calculated metrics. And so if I just copy and paste, they're going to be pretty much the exact same. What we really want, though, is we want to go after things like average CTR. This is really our averages. And our return on ad spend type metrics. So we have average CTR, average CPC, cost per conversion, and return on ad spend. So cost per conversion. Looks like we have enough room to spell out the word conversion. And return on ad spend. Let's call it ROAS. Now this one I'm not going to be able to calculate because I don't have the conversion values handy in the API, but we'll see what we can do when it comes to return on ad spend. Maybe we'll do a calculated field and make each conversion worth a certain amount. So I'll show you how to do that in just a moment here. Let's start with click-through rate. So we're going to go look at our data, and we have a blended metric right now. It's all of our impressions together. We're actually going to go with clicks and then the all clicks. And so this is going to get a little bit complex because we have to go with clicks, and notice that the clicks and the all is not available to us. We can't use calculated field on a calculated field, so we need to do some math here and remember how our order of operations work. So we have our clicks And just one thing to note is I'm basically clicking on this stuff and it's not working. So sometimes this happens with Data Studio when it gets a little bit crazy. There's like a little bit of a bar moving around trying to get things to work. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have to save this report if it's not working and start over again. So I'm just going to save this thing and refresh. Okay, so I've refreshed my report to see if this thing is going to work how we want it to work. And I'm going to see if the clicks now shows up. It does. So clicks plus clicks from Google plus clicks from Bing. And we're going to look at that. We're going to do that all in a bracket because that's combined together. And we're going to do that divided by impressions from Facebook plus impressions from Google plus impressions from Bing. And we're going to do this as a percentage. And let's see how this thing looks. This is going to take a little while for this thing to go do a round trip, try to get all this stuff together. But let's see if we can get our average click-through rate. And it should be somewhere around, basically 500 into 20,000 is about 2.5%. So if that equals 2.5%, that means that we're doing okay with that calculated metric. And we're going to have to do this for all of our calculated metrics. As you can see here, it does get a little bit cumbersome. The good news is, and as you can see here, it does take a little bit of time for things to work. Is that right? That is not right. Okay, since I'm a teacher and they say to teach is to learn twice, I'm going to do a mea culpa and show you where I screwed up as I was going through things. And actually, I didn't really screw up. It's just a nuance in the way the data works. And so when I created my blended data, I had previously did date and then month and year combined on all these things. Now, it turns out that if I'm doing a consolidated report, it breaks down when I do that combination and the numbers don't add up. And I think it might have to do with the way that Google has these. If you see in the Google API, they automatically make you choose the aggregation. And they're basically saying you don't have a choice as to whether it's a sum or what you're doing. And so they aggregate it automatically. And that causes a lot of problems when you're trying to sum things up for a month versus when you're trying to sum it up for a day. And so since I'm not doing a daily report, and in fact, this template is for a monthly basis at the very least, I'm just going to say no to the date field. I'm not going to blend down there, and we're just going straight to monthly only. And so when I made that decision and I made that choice, I updated the field here, and my click-through rate is exactly what I expected. Going to 500 into 20,000 is 2.55, or pretty close to that. Actually, I'm going to have to go through and check the rest of my calculations. But as we go through this is how we troubleshoot reports. This is the danger of working on consolidated data. This is really the value of me creating this template and then making it available to you. So that's part of what the learning experience is that I am creating a template and you won't have to go through these same troubles. All you need to do is plug in your own accounts, connect to Supermetrics and Google Ads, and you're ready to go. So hopefully you saw this perspective and you can either fix this yourself if you're a DIY person, or if you want, you can just purchase the template where we do this for you. And so I'm going to go through and complete the rest of these items and make sure that these calculations are good. We're not going to make you sit through all that, but when we're done, I'll show you what it looks like when it's all put together. Okay, it's time to wrap this one up. We have completed a complete dashboard when it comes to advertising across all our channels. We're going to have costs and conversions by month, and we're going to have our impressions and clicks on the other side. I decided to go against having a pie chart because it just didn't quite give us what we needed. It was based on dates, and I actually wanted to show by platform. And so that's the reason for that decision to go with the two charts here. As you can see, we have sorted out our click-through rate to a certain extent. It doesn't match up perfectly, but it's pretty close. And so we're going to go with it in this first iteration. This is probably a V.01 of this dashboard, and it's good enough for now. Average cost per click is very close to being accurate, within a cent or two. Cost per conversion is very close as well. And our return on ad spend is very close. Now, the one that might be interesting to you is the calculation of return on ad spend. It is using a standard ROI calculation. And an ROI calculation is your total revenue. In this case, I just took the conversions, and I'm just saying that each conversion is worth $300. So 300 times the 13 is 3,900. And then to finish the calculation, you subtract your costs. So we did 3,900 minus the cost of the ads, which is 380. So that's going to get us to about $3,520 or so. Then we divide that by our cost, the 380.65, and when we get that, and then you multiply it by 100, or you do it as a percentage, and that's how we're getting our percentage here. Now, I don't think that's the perfect ROI. It should be more like 900%, but it's going to be okay for this first version. Now, the reason for these things not working, it could be a combination of the aggregation levels, and could just be it's been a long day, or flaws in the API. Whatever it is, we have finished our V.1 of this dashboard, and I'm pretty happy with it. And so I'd love for you to check out this template. Hopefully it fits your needs. Hopefully it saves you some time, and you can get it to work exactly how you want it for your business. And you can use it to gain insights. And the other thing is, when you purchase this template, it is available for you, all the updates into the future. So as we get into a full version 1.0 rollout, as we sort through some of the nuances in Google's APIs, and as Google Data Studio gets better, we are going to make upgrades and updates to this template as well. So hopefully you enjoyed this perspective as we built out a live dashboard. There's a lot of nuance that goes into creating these things using the Data Studio platform, but I'm pretty happy with what we have, and I think it looks pretty cool. And hopefully you can download it and install it for your own data. Or if you don't choose to do that, you can at least learn how we built this thing out and see what our settings were from this video. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that live look into Google Data Studio and how we can consolidate data across several platforms. Let's summarize what we talked about inside of this video. First thing is, don't be afraid to find inspiration with the analog. Now, if I hadn't drawn out this template on a whiteboard first, I probably wouldn't have gotten nearly as far, and I probably would have given up a lot faster and had an incomplete report. But at least we had our North Star, our guiding light, which is our dashboard that we drew out on the whiteboard. Utilize Data Studio for the heavy lifting, and you can see here, there's a lot of heavy lifting. It can do a lot, but it also has some flaws when dealing with more complex reports. These are things that are going to improve over time, and as it improves, we're going to improve our template as well. For PPC reporting, make sure you have Supermetrics in place, because it's the only way to get data from multiple platforms. Now, there may be other connectors for individual platforms. There may be other connectors that do multiple platforms, but I found that Supermetrics works the best, and that's my endorsement for you. The other thing is, if you're a data-driven member, we have a discount on Supermetrics to make the price more affordable. And this is just a psychological thing. You do have what it takes to make a really good report. We've shown you the tools. I've shown you the skills that it takes to create these reports, and hopefully you can use it for your own data now. And hopefully this point of view helps you troubleshoot and helps you make improvements to your own Data Studio dashboards. And finally, if you want to have a shortcut, if you want to have what I just built in your hands and updates as it keeps on going forward, then I'd love for you to sign up for this template. And when you do that, not only do you get the template, you also get a savings on Supermetrics. So to summarize your next steps, purchase this template from Data Driven using the link we provide. And when you sign up for the template and you become a member of Data Driven, you get our 20% off discount on Supermetrics as well. So there you have it. That's how I consolidate PPC reporting to get rid of the redundant and to do it all inside Google Data Studio. And now it's your turn. There's a few things that I'd like you to do to take action on what you've learned in this video. The first one is to sign up and to download this report template from My Data Driven. The second thing I'd like you to do is to sign up for Supermetrics, because that is a connector that pulls things together across multiple systems. And the third thing that I want you to do is to put this all together into your own report and share the results in the comments.